I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Erin Bartels. Erin is the award-winning author of We Hope for Better Things, The Words Between Us, All That We Carried, The Girl Who Could Breathe Underwater, and Everything Is Just Beginning. A two-time Christy finalist and winner of two 2020 WFWA Star Wards and the 2020 Michigan Notable Book Award, Erin has been a publishing professional for more than 20 years. She lives in mid-Michigan with her pastor husband, their teenage son, and a neurotic little chihuahua mix with a devoted online fan base. Her latest novel, The Lady with the Dark Hair, came out yesterday. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
I am so glad to have you here this morning. Well, I feel like you are so much more than this bio. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Actually, I'm not that different from the bio because my whole life is wrapped up in books beyond being a writer. I also work for a publishing house, and so I've worked for them for I think 22 years now. And most of the work I do for them is in marketing. I'm a copywriter, so
Okay.
um, yeah, I do a lot of that sort of thing. I went to school as an English major and thought I would teach, and then got a job. And since my pastor husband was going to seminary at the time, I was like, well, we can't really do two graduate degrees at the same time. And life just steered me in this direction. So yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about books, writing books, reading books, marketing books. It's all about the
Yeah.
books.
I love that, though. You still have created a path of something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, and it was something that I didn't expect it to go that way. I think when you're an English major, you think of writing in a different way than when you actually work on real books in real life and you realize, oh, this is much more accessible than it seemed to be growing up. And then when
Yeah.
I need a break from books and staring at computers, I do a lot of physical things, a lot of physical hobbies. So I sew a lot of my own clothes. I've quilted a lot. I do gardening, play the guitar, and paint.
I love that. That was going to be my next question. If you are reading and you're writing most of your day, do you find that at night when you get home, do you need to reset
Oh,
sometimes?
and the thing is, I'm always home because I've worked from home for
True.
almost 20 years now. So yeah, it's interesting trying to find those points of differentiation between your working life and the rest of your life. And I think we've settled into a pretty comfortable, we're always kind of doing everything sort of life.
Yeah.
And it's okay with us. And my husband has a lot of other pursuits as well beyond his work. And so and I think that our son is developing the same sort of thing. He spends a lot of his time now making music, and doing other like creative things like that. So we're all creative in our own way, in our own little bubble.
Yeah. And what an example you're giving for your son that you and your husband are both pursuing other things, right? And he's seeing you
Yeah,
work at
because
it.
I don't think that people of our parents' generation did a lot of that. They didn't have a lot of time for that. I know my parents didn't. Whether or not they had other aspirations, I'm not sure. But certainly I feel like it's worth showing that if you really love doing something, it's worth working at, and it's okay if it's not your main job. Like it's okay if it's something that is an additional thing.
Yeah. That's something I am re-exploring a bit in motherhood now. My kids are 8, 5, and 3, so I'm kind of coming out of the weeds and
Right. Yeah, what do you want to do from
yeah.
this point forward? Yeah.
And life has changed, right? Where I don't
Yeah,
have endless free time to do it. So it's like, okay, what would I want to spend my time doing in the small snippets of time I do have?
exactly. Yeah. And I think that every woman who ends up with a family has to go through that situation where they re-examine, what they're doing with their time and what do people actually need from me versus what do I think that they need from me. A lot of times we take on responsibilities that we don't need to continue doing, rather than like training our kids to do those things. And I think that that's one of the things that in the book that we're going to be talking about today, that's one of the things that one of the two main characters goes through. Like, what are the things that are actually expected of me, and what is time that's my own to do my own thing?
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful advice because we are also in this. We've had a couple family meetings now where we're instituting chores in the house. Like, you're going to start
Yeah.
doing some things, and
Yes.
we are turning the tide there, hopefully,
Yeah.
in
Well,
our
and I
home.
mean, that takes extra work. Training somebody else to do something, to your standard
Yeah,
it's always more work than just doing it yourself.
100%. I have faith we can see it through to the end,
Yeah.
though, and it'll.
Yeah.
We started small with one chore per, child that was old enough to do chores, and
Yeah.
that's, for a couple weeks, we're just going to work at that, and then we'll
Yeah.
add.
Yeah. 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 And it's really exciting when they start doing all these things by themselves.
Yes. Yes. And I, like you said, it's, also I want to raise responsible adults too,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Right.
okay. Yep. You're getting old enough. We can start adding these things in.
Yeah.
So, well, you have your latest book. It actually came out yesterday. And so, The Lady with the Dark Hair. Can you tell us and entice the listeners a little bit about it?
Yes, I hope so. Um, so it's a dual timeline story where the modern day story happens in East Lansing, Michigan, which is not far from where I live. And the past timeline takes place starting in 1878 in southern France. And then it kind of moves about a little bit through a few different areas of continental Europe and ends up in Gibraltar, which is a place that I think a lot of people don't know a lot about, even though it's been famous, for thousands of years throughout history of, people fighting over it, and it's a really fascinating place. So the basic story is in the present day. The character of Esther is living with her mother, who suffers from schizophrenia, and they have a little museum and it's dedicated to the work of their ancestor. And it's kind of struggling, and she's not sure if it's going to survive, but it's one of those things where, not on my watch, I can't be the one to let this fail. And she feels like she has a lot of responsibility in her life. And she reconnects with a former art history professor who she's really excited to show some of these paintings to, especially one that's very important to her, which is titled The Lady with the Dark Hair. That's where the title comes from. And when he sees it, he kind of brings into question whether or not it's the same person who painted it as all those other paintings at the museum. And that really starts her down a road of looking into her family history and looking into the history of this painter and figuring out what is it about this that doesn't ring true to him and how dare he? I'm the one who knows about this.
Yeah.
So she goes off on this quest of discovery. In the meantime, when you go to the past timeline, it's about a woman named Viviana who's from Catalonia. She's in southern France, kind of on the lam, and she's working in the house of an artist. And it's her story of what happens to her as she's trying to um, kind of get through life in a very difficult time to get through life if you were a young woman with no family and you were in a country where you didn't really speak the language very well, and what could be ways that you were taken advantage of? What are things that you're expected to do? Can you do anything on your own, or do you need a man to do it for you? And her journey toward really embracing who she is as a person.
Yeah.
And that was a really long-winded
No,
explanation.
I'm so glad you did. I think it was perfect. And I'm always so impressed when authors come on and I'm like, and not spoil the story, right? Like you give us just enough of like, ooh, okay, so what
Yeah,
else?
yeah, that's very important to me. No spoiling.
But listeners, the cover is absolutely beautiful. You need to go look it up when you get a
It
moment. If
really
you're
is. They
driving,
did a good
go look
job.
up the cover of the book. It's beautiful. So I have a couple questions because as I read this, I had the privilege of getting to read it before we talked today. Have you traveled to Gibraltar?
No, I have not.
Okay, you did such a
But I
good
can
job.
tell you,
Yeah.
yeah, how I ended up writing about it. I have a former professor who's Gibraltarian, and he was an English professor of mine in school, and we reconnected several years back. My second novel was about books, and it was about classic literature. And I ended up sending a copy to three of my professors. and just as a thank you because they really had an impact in why I wrote that particular book and what I chose to do as a career. And in doing that, and then also a weird confluence of events where one of them saw something in some bookstore about my book coming out, and they're like, "Oh, that was a student of mine." It was like before they even got the book. And
Sure.
so I ended up going back to my alma mater, which is Grand Valley State University, as a distinguished alumni, and reconnected with a couple of these professors, and this was one of them. And I always have trouble answering the question of where did the idea for your book come from, because
Sure.
I don't really know. Like they just enough things kind of attach themselves to each other, right? So already I was somebody who enjoyed art and painting. And I reconnected with this person. I asked him questions about Gibraltar, and I thought that'd be a really interesting setting for a story
Yeah.
because I've never read anything set there. I've never seen a movie set there. And so he's got more books about Gibraltar than you can even imagine. I
Wow.
got to interview him about growing up there in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. When he grew up there, the border was closed. So if they wanted to go to Spain, they had to go by boat. You couldn't go over the land
On the
area.
ferry.
Yeah, you had, and it took all day. Like something that would have taken you 20 minutes now took 12 hours. So people didn't leave for a long time. And he went to school in London and then came and has taught in the US for decades. And so he was just a really great resource. And he also has all these connections with people who still live in Gibraltar. So I got to ask him questions, and he's like, I'll ask my WhatsApp group. And he'd go and ask his WhatsApp group, and they would answer like whether or not a man in his 40s would wear jeans in Gibraltar or anything like that.
I love that.
Silly little things that you can't really look up. You have
Yeah,
to talk to somebody who's there. So I did a lot of my research with that group of people.
that's amazing. And then also the painting, your descriptions of the painting. Are you a painter yourself?
Yes, yes. So I
Okay.
do paint. I've painted since I was probably in elementary school. I've always been interested in art. I was, the quintessential kid that read, drew, painted, and pretended. I was always in my head. That
Yeah.
was me. And so yeah, I at some point they put Bob Ross on Netflix,
Yep.
years and years ago when my kid was really small. And I was like, let's watch this because I remembered watching it when I was a kid on PBS. And I realized every once in a while I have this realization as an adult. I'm like, oh, I'm an adult. I can do the things that I was not allowed to do as a kid. So as a kid, I was always told that oil paints were expensive and messy. And
Okay.
I was like, well, I'm an adult now, and there's a Michael's just down the road, and I can go buy some paint. And so I decided to try it out, and I really love it. And so during the year that I was researching and writing this book in 2022, I did a lot of that. I painted a self-portrait every month, trying to get good at painting a person, because usually I would paint landscapes or natural things and
Sure.
stuff like that. So that was really, really fun. And so now I have these 12 self-portraits that I'm going to you can't hang up 12 pictures of yourself in your own house. So
Yeah.
I had, I had the launch party on the 21st, and we raffled off a number of them,
How fun.
kept a couple, that sort of thing.
That's a great idea. I love
Yeah,
that.
it was really fun.
I felt like I am not, like you said, we could have a variety of creative pursuits, and art is one that, like, just stop. It makes me feel anxious because I'm so bad at it.
A lot of people say they're bad at things, and I think sometimes and I don't know anybody's individual cases, but I think sometimes it goes back to at some point in life, I tried something and it didn't turn out like I hoped it would. And so I decided I didn't have that talent.
Yeah.
But like anything else, it's a series of steps and a series of skills that you learn, and you can build on those. Nobody's born able to write a book or
Yeah.
make a quilt or build a house. You learn all these individual skills. And if it's something that you really love and would like to do, you can learn anything with YouTube today. Like you can
Yeah.
find a tutorial. So we're in an age where like you really can try those things again, those things that you
Yeah.
wish you could do and you think you don't have aptitude for. It's just learning the steps, and and realizing that it's going to be a while before something turns out how you'd like.
Sure. That is
Yeah.
a great point. I have been exploring watercolors a little bit more with my kids because I'm like, well, we have
Oh,
them. I
yeah.
might as
Good
well
for
paint right along with you. And so
yeah.
I've been doing some watercolor things and it hasn't gone as terribly as I thought it would. But
Yeah.
the point of me saying that is I feel like I learned so much about painting from this book as
Oh,
well because it was something
fun.
that I've never explored, right? Because I was like, oh, I'm just bad at it. So,
Yeah, well, I hope that's the case. I realized the other day that my books altogether they fall into these categories of what I enjoyed in school.
yeah.
So like one of them's history, one of them's English, one of them's art, one of them's music, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they're just ways to explore the things I enjoy doing. So I hope that they make other people when they read them, they think like, oh, that's a really interesting topic, or that seems really fun. Maybe I should try that out.
Yeah. Well, and you spend so much time with this book that I would hope it would be something that you're passionate about, that you're spending time researching and writing. And
Yeah. And that's true with any book. And honestly, that's why I set the modern day story where I did, because I didn't have to research about the town I live in.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, absolutely.
because there's so much other research to do.
Yeah. Do you find I love the dual timeline stories? I think it's one
Yeah.
of my favorite ways to read. Is it difficult as a writer to keep track of both of the stories or have them meld together throughout?
I feel like so I've written I think three books that go back and forth. So my first book actually had three timelines. And then I had one that was, sort of a now and then, but it wasn't a historical book. And so this is kind of going back to that historical element. And I write them in order that you read them. So like I don't write one story and then the other story and then try to figure out how to put them
Okay.
together. Because I think that in the way that I write, I don't outline. I know generally what I want to say and where things are going, but I'm really discovering the story as I write. So when you do it that way and you discover as you write and you're doing both of them at the same time, they lock together a lot
Yeah.
more naturally that way, I think, than if you did them separately and tried to put them together. And the themes that you're developing in one will pop up in the other and they'll build on each other. So that's generally how I do it. And I haven't had trouble remembering what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do know that sometimes for a reader, that's difficult because you're not immersed in the story the way the writer was when they were writing it. Like you don't know what's coming next, and they did in some way. So yeah, I know that some people really love dual timeline and some people really don't.
Yes. But, and I think this is true with anything. Sometimes I'll read a book that's been very hyped, right? And I'll read it and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, that really wasn't, I didn't love it. But I think
Right.
there's a book out there for everybody and we all have
Yeah.
what we like and we all have different tastes and interests and pursuits. And so, how could you possibly appeal to everyone? Like, your book's going to
Oh, and there's no
find
point in trying.
the
No.
readers that are going to need it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no point in trying to appeal to everyone. That's why when I write primarily for myself initially.
Yeah.
I'm my ideal reader because
Yeah.
I'm writing about the thing I'm interested in. And then after that, you're thinking about the people who like your work and oh, they'll like this too. Or if there's something that feels like it's going to be a stretch for them, um, yeah, you think about that, but you have to honor the story that you're writing
Yeah.
and not think about what people are going to say about it at any given point. And if I'm honoring the story that I'm writing and the characters that I've written, whether or not they do the thing that you want them to do or it ends the way you want it to end is immaterial to me as I'm
Yeah.
writing because I've got to tell the story that is being told.
Yeah. Is that a skill you've learned over time?
Yes, yes. I think that the difficulty with someone who loved English class and loved reading and was a good writer in school is that that does not necessarily translate to writing the thing that you like to read. Because when you go to school and you major in English, you're majoring in English literature, let's say, you're not creative writing. I had a creative writing class, but you're not going to write a novel in a creative writing class. You're going to
Yeah.
write poetry and short stories. Um, you have to learn how to tell a story that's that long. And I think a lot of people have always been told they were good writers and who are good writers, when they start trying to find an agent or find a publishing house to publish their book and run into resistance because it's not ready, sometimes people feel like, well, they're just wrong. But
Yeah.
really, they're not wrong. You might have great writing, and this happened to me when I was looking for an agent the first time with a manuscript that has not been published and will not be published.
Sure.
I was told many, many times, like, oh, we love the writing. You're such a great writer, but we have to work on this. Or can you revise and resubmit? And it took me a while to figure out, like, it wasn't that these individual scenes were not good. It
Hmm.
was that as a whole, it wasn't a good experience for the reader of a novel. I
Yeah.
had to learn how to do that. So, and that takes a while.
Yeah. And there's so much, as you're saying these things, I keep coming back to the word vulnerable, right? Like there's so much
Yeah.
vulnerability in putting yourself out there, not only to think about like, well, I don't, I have to honor the story. I don't care what people, like in the short of it, I can't care about what people are going to think about it because I'm honoring the story. But also then putting yourself out there for the publishing world to hear, yes, this is great writing, but it doesn't work in the form of a novel, right? I mean, there's a lot of vulnerability that you have to conquer
Yeah,
to get
and
past that.
yeah, and I think that some people, they talk about thick skin. I think it's just being experienced with being criticized. So I
Sure.
think because so much of my 9 to 5 job is with publishing, and all of my writing is critiqued and edited daily
Yeah.
because that's just part of the game. I don't feel bad when somebody thinks it should be a different way. It's not an indictment on me. It's just that as a reader, they were confused. And
Yeah.
so I need to think about that. And the thing that I thought I was getting across is not coming across. So how do I make it come across? And it's not personal.
Yeah.
It's just I'm creating an experience for another person. And if they're not having the experience I hope they have, then I need to adjust some things.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a great perspective of it for sure. So, do you have a favorite book or that was the most fun to write, or one of your favorites?
Oh gosh, I enjoy all of them.
I
One of
figured
them,
as much. I've never asked that, but I was thinking about this the
yeah,
other day. I'm like, when I have authors that have multiple books, I wonder if if they have ones they enjoyed more than others.
yeah, it's always the one I'm working on currently because that's the thing
Okay.
I'm most excited about, right? But I will say that I think that the book that I feel is the best was the hardest to write, not because it was some really complex story structure or anything like that, but because it touched on the most personal things that I've put in
Sure.
a book. And that was The Girl Who Could Breathe Underwater. So
Yeah.
that to me, I would probably say is my favorite. But it's not the most fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
This one's fun, I feel like. And I think that it's fun that it's it's a little bit of a globe-trotting thing. There's a lot of different places you get to experience. There's a lot of things to think about, especially for female readers, because it brings into question a lot of limitations in history that have been put on women versus what are the limitations on us today and how much of that is self-imposed, and the things that we think we should be doing and what people will think of us if we do something else and all of those things. So it is really fun, and it's kind of the one I'm working on, now. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've been exploring that through my podcast as well. A lot of
yeah,
that, like almost like a lifestyle by design, a little bit.
yeah, yeah. What is the thing that I'm interested now interested in, and how can I feed that interest,
Yeah.
And as somebody who collects hobbies, I go from one to the other seasonally, like all I can think about right now is all the stuff I want to do out in the yard. That's all I want to do. You know,
Tis the season.
it really is. But yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that you can spend time on the thing that you want to spend time on. It doesn't have to always be for other people. We were talking about our kids learning how to do chores. Somebody else can do a lot of the stuff you're doing around the house so that you
Yeah.
have some time to do stuff for yourself
Yeah.
because they're all doing stuff for themselves too.
Exactly. Give
Why
yourself
don't you expand it
permission.
as the mom?
Yes, that is such an important lesson for us is that
Yeah.
giving ourselves permission to explore
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
do that. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. It sounds like you've been a lifelong reader, but what genres do you enjoy reading?
Oh, well, what's funny is that I read more nonfiction than fiction. A
Wow.
lot of what I read in my time now is research. So
Okay.
all last year, I don't think I read anything that wasn't for research for the next thing I'm writing.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
but I really enjoy literary fiction. I enjoy going back to the things that I liked as a kid. I I reread, if I reread a book, it's probably something I read as a kid.
Okay. Yeah.
So I loved reading the books that I loved to my son when he was smaller, and we read to him every night. And I had to convince him a number of times, like, you will like this, even though there's a girl on the cover. You know, you'll like this. And I was always right. So those Anne of Green Gables, A Wrinkle in Time. I loved Watership Down. That's the book I've read the most.
Oh my God. That's
And
on my nightstand right now. I'm revisiting it because I don't think I read it for I think we read it in sixth grade. It was an assigned
oh,
reading.
really? Wow.
And it was so difficult for me to read in sixth grade that I'm like, everybody talks about this book. I need to go back and
Yeah.
re-explore and see like there's something here.
I learned a lot of vocabulary from reading that book as a child because
Yeah.
there were lots of words I had to look up. And there were a lot of things that I thought I understood. And then when I reread it later, I was like, oh, that's
Yep.
what that means. But it's okay to stretch yourself. Like I like that it
Yep.
stretched me as a reader. Yeah, so when I was a kid, I liked reading about adventure and people who were not typical, right? You like reading about the kids who are doing something a little different.
Yeah.
Um, and then today, when I'm reading for fun and I'm reading nonfiction, I love Bill Bryson.
Oh,
He's
yes.
a great author. He's funny and very informative. And I feel like that kind of informs my writing as well. Like I like to be informative in some way where people are learning something that
Yes.
they didn't know before. But I also like to throw in a little bit of humor. It's usually pretty dry, but I like
He's
having
an
that.
expert at that.
He's
As
so
a
great.
personal question, do you have a favorite? We're actually, so for our book club, we do a fiction and then a nonfiction book, my local book club here.
Yeah.
And we chose Bill Bryson knowing he was going to be funny, this comedic relief. But it's for this month coming up. We're picking our book. Do you have a favorite of his?
Well, I think the one that I laughed the most at is A Walk in the Woods.
Okay. All
It's
right.
so funny.
Yeah.
And I think when I first read it, I was really pregnant. And I was just sitting there in bed cracking up, like I could barely breathe. And I think my husband was a little worried that like our baby was going to be affected some way about this. Like, you
Yeah.
need to breathe, stop laughing.
Yeah. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
so I
Yeah.
love that one. But anything of his is great. And there's another writer who I really enjoy, Tony Horwitz. It's not
Okay. Oh, I think I've
Horowitz,
read him too as
but
well.
a voyage long and strange is when he
Okay.
retraces Captain James Cook's travels in the Pacific, and it
Yes.
is fascinating.
We lived in Hawaii for a
Well,
stint
you
with one
probably
of,
like that book
and
then.
so I think I got into him because we were living there. Because I always try to read locally. Like as we move, we're somewhere for 3 years. I
Yeah,
just try to read locally and learn about the area. And because
that's
I've
such
been a
a great.
lifelong reader,
That's so
I do it through
great.
books. So,
Yeah,
and yeah, I think that's how I stumbled upon that book was back when we were living in Hawaii.
yeah,
So, well,
very
thank you. That was just a little aside. We meet on Saturday night, and I know we're going to choose our Bill Bryson book. So,
Yeah, I would definitely recommend A Walk in the Woods. But
okay.
I'll say this, the movie's terrible.
Okay.
Don't watch the movie,
All
read the
right.
book.
Good to know. I love it. So, and then I imagine when you say, okay, right now, last year I read only nonfiction and it was all research. I imagine it's like you're back in school where you're like, I can't even pick up the books I know that I'm going to love because I'll be drawn to this book over here.
Right.
And I need to focus on my, the
Well, and you
research
know
for
what?
this
I'm
novel.
not even tempted by other books because
Okay.
I'm so focused on what I want to learn so that I can write this next book. You
Okay.
know, so in my case, I've not been like, oh, I have tons of books at home that I haven't read,
Sure.
tons of them, and I do want to read them at some point, but I'm not even in the mood
Okay.
until I have the time. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, now I can read a book for myself. What will it be? And because I also work in publishing, I'm always reading books
Sure.
that are not necessarily the book that I would choose. So a lot of my reading life is caught up in books that I wouldn't normally go after.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm just imagining how you've structured your life to be so much around books. It's impressive.
It was sort of accidental.
But what a great path. You have also been so gracious to prepare a book flight for us of 3 books. So can you tell us a little bit about how they pair together?
Yes, they are actually very well paired, I think. So I would say that my first one that I would suggest people open with is called The Secret Lives of Color, and it's
Okay.
by Cassia St. Clair. And it's a really fun book. It's very high design. The inside is all of these pages that are
Beautiful.
marked with different colors. And they are about 2 pages. I think the longest ones are maybe 4 pages long of where we got certain colors. Where
Oh,
did
so
this shade
cool.
red come from? Where did this blue come from? When did it come from? Because in the past, in the long past, people didn't have as many colors
Sure.
to work with, and certain colors are really rare, and certain colors are really expensive, and so much of world history has been affected by people saying, "Okay, they make this color in this country." So I'm going to go exploit that country so I can get this
Wow.
color. It's fascinating. So that's a great opening to exploring where we get certain colors. So anybody who's interested in art, fashion, home design, paint colors for your walls on your house, it's really interesting.
Well, now that having read this, The Lady coming out, I'm like, oh, I can see where you used some of those tidbits within the novel. So you'll learn some of that within the book as well.
Absolutely, because there are certain colors that hold certain meaning for people, right?
Yeah.
Um, the follow-up to that, if you're interested in color and you want to explore it more as a story, I would suggest this book, Color: A Natural History of the Palette by Victoria Finlay. And this is an interesting book because it's part history of colors, but it's more of a memoir because you're reading her journey, her literal journeys to these places to find what's the source of this color.
Wow.
And it's really fascinating because sometimes she finds what she's looking for and sometimes she does not. And it's just a really I like stories that take me other places. I
Yeah.
love I love stories that I think probably like you that help me learn about a different place or learn about a different culture. And what's interesting about really specific stories like through color, or there's another book I love that's just about the history of America seen through forestry, which seems
Wow.
super boring, but it's not. Not. Those types of stories are the ones you don't know. And they give
Yeah.
you this color for the rest of the things that you do know, the stuff you learned in school.
Yeah.
They fill in these gaps with interesting things instead of just dates. So that's one of those types of books. So if you like books that take you different places, then that's a good one.
Yeah, and I was going to add that I think that is, like you had said earlier, you like reading books that are informational and you can learn from it. And I think it's for those exact reasons, is because it can help you connect
Yes.
things you've maybe learned way back in school that is maybe this information that's stored back in the cobwebs of your brain. But then when
Yeah.
you read it through story, it becomes so much more alive and tangible, I
Yeah.
think,
And
is
it's it's
usable
it's
information.
unfortunate the way we learn history in school. It's really
Yes,
unfortunate
I agree.
because if you learn it as part of the whole, everything makes more sense. And when you learn it separate from the rest of human society, none of it seems like anything anybody would need to know. Like, I don't need to know the date of the Magna Carta.
Yeah,
Who
exactly.
cares? But if you learn it within the context of the world in which it was happening and you learn it through story, it's really
Yeah.
fascinating. And I think that's a lot of the type of thing I try to bring out in my stories is that life is very layered, and considering all those layers and how it's not simple. Life's complex and people are
Yeah.
complex. And I think that that's probably where my interest in history intersects with the way I write.
And I think that's important for our kids to understand too, right? I think that's something you learn is over time is how the complexities of the world and
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Because when you're in school, you're learning formulas.
Yeah.
So it seems like everything has a simple answer, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it doesn't.
Yes. Okay, so that was Color by Victoria Finlay. And then what's the last book of the pairing today?
Okay. The last one is called The Mirror and the Palette, and it's by Jennifer Higgy.
Okay.
And this to me, I think I started reading this after I decided on the subject of my book, but it did inform the way the story developed. So this is a book that is full of the stories of female artists. So in the past, women were very restricted from attending the academy or art schools. They were very restricted in what they could paint. So women of a certain class would learn how to paint botanicals. They'd learn how to draw. That was something that they would do along with learning French and learning the piano. But they were not expected to paint in a way that a man painted.
Mhm.
They were not seen as capable of painting on a grand scale religious subjects or mythical subjects or important things. They were supposed to decorate things. And this is a book that explores a whole bevy of female artists who have existed all along that nobody learns about.
Yeah.
And the way that they were able to make their art despite the limitations of their society and the time that they lived in, and how they learned to create, and their amazing artwork, which is just as good as anything that any man has done that's in the museums, but is lost. A lot of times women did not sign their work because they were either being humble or they had to hide the fact that they were doing it. A lot of times things that are attributed to men are actually their female students. A lot of women learned from their fathers who were artists or from some other person who was willing to give them the time because they couldn't go to school. And the thing that a lot of women did to learn how to paint people was they painted themselves. They made
Okay.
self-portraits because they were a model who was there willing to be painted. And they weren't allowed in life drawing classes where you would draw a nude figure and learn how the human body actually worked and learn how to draw it accurately. So they had to look at themselves or their family members. And so that's usually why women's subjects are so domestic in the past, because that's all they were allowed. They couldn't go out in public and do this. They couldn't go to certain places without chaperones. So it was a very restricted life, and yet they painted. And so it's a
Wow.
really fun book.
And in just hearing you talk about this, I can hear all the tie-ins with your book
Yeah.
as well, and I love it. So listeners, you should totally read The Lady with the Dark Hair and then go and read this book flight, and then you can find all of the tie-ins because it's so
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. It is a fun little grouping.
Yes. So that was The Mirror and the Palette by Jennifer Higgy. And I have literally never thought about that, how most of the women you see in paintings are domestic. And like the
Yes.
reason why. I've
Yeah.
never thought about that.
Yeah, and I think that you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing too is just thinking about the number. It's so ironic and hypocritical. The number of paintings out there where men painted naked women, but women could not see a naked man in a life drawing class. Like, heavens no, she'd faint away. This
Yeah.
is horrible. It's like it's just it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yes. To think about what the box we were put in, right?
Yes,
And that,
yes. And so let's figure out ways to break out of that and do the things we're called to do.
yeah. Part of me thought as you were talking about that was it underlying, were they just intimidated about like a woman's potential?
I think that that's a huge part of it. When you think of just how um, how rampant and how awful the type of sexism that people encountered in the past compared to what we have today. And
Yeah.
I remember, I mean, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I felt very much like I was looked down on and wasn't as important, and you're not as strong. You know, I was a great sports player, but I'd never be on a team that anybody cared about.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. I remember specific things that people said to me that just felt like they thought you were a lower class of person. So even when I was a kid, this is happening. But think
Yeah.
about it hundreds of years ago when you had completely separate spheres of life as well. And women were for this thing, men were for this thing. And what's funny is all of the restrictions placed on women were sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. They're weak, they faint. Well, yeah, if you put them in clothes where they can't breathe, they're going to
Yeah.
have trouble.
Yeah.
Their constitutions are just not as strong. Well, if you never let them out of the house, they're not going to develop an immune system like you have. Like there's such easy answers to so many of these things.
Yeah.
And women do the hard work. I mean, beyond doing the work of like running a household, you're having multiple children, many of them dying on you, you almost dying, or
Yeah.
maybe you do die in childbirth. And you're doing all of these things that men wouldn't do. And in addition, you want to do some of the things that men do. Like you can do everything. You
Yeah.
can't do it all at once,
Yeah.
but you can do anything that you want. You just can't do it all at once. So,
Yes.
like the people with the three children in the house who are still like raising them, you're not going to be able to do it all, but eventually you will. You'll
Yeah.
have the time and you should do what you want to do.
Yeah. It seems like right now, like exactly what you're saying, this glimmer of like, there's this
Yeah.
time that's like this ethereal
Yeah.
glimmering thing that will happen one day. I can grab onto it again.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's important that people think about like, what do you want to do when
Yeah.
you don't have to do
It is
all the things you have
so
to do?
important because I remember last summer, my husband's like, "Hey, I got the kids, go do something." And I literally had this moment of
Don't know.
I don't even know what I like to do anymore. I
Yep.
have no idea. And I like panicked because I'm like, I feel like I know myself pretty well, but to like get to this moment of I didn't know who I was, I was
Well, and also I think you have this feeling of like, okay, I have to make this count. Like it has to be
like,
really
yeah,
good when it doesn't have to be. Like it could just be, I want to take a really leisurely walk and look at butterflies, like that
yeah,
doesn't have to be a big thing. But I think when we have limited time, we feel like, okay, I got to make it count.
yeah. Or I drive to the grocery store and I sit in the parking lot for 5 minutes just because it's quiet.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, that's my stealing 5 minutes of time to be in my own
Yeah.
head for 5 minutes.
Yes.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
This has been a fantastic conversation, I feel like, on women and color, and I love it. So, how I love to end our show is with our bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions.
Okay.
So, you've answered a couple of them, so I've got some other ones on deck for you.
All right.
Do you prefer hard copy or audiobooks?
I am a physical book person. I like underlining and I like making notes. I do know that there's some great audio out there, but I just feel like I like the hard copy.
Okay. All right. And then, what is one book you've read that has intimidated you?
Oh gosh. Intimidated me. I'll tell you this. It's one that I didn't finish. I have a friend who loves Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. And it's 1,000 pages, and I was like, well, I'll just read that because I want to know why he likes this book so much. And I got about 10% in, and I was like, I don't care. I don't
Yeah.
care why he likes this book. It's boring. I have no idea what's going on. I too many footnotes. It's gone. So I
Yes.
still have a copy of Infinite Jest that I have not read, and it is intimidating. There's a lot going on. I don't get it.
Okay. All right. What genre is it in?
Oh, that's very literary fiction. It's
Okay.
very postmodern.
Okay.
I don't know. He's a great writer. He has great essays, but this just isn't worth my time.
In a tome form, it might be
Yeah.
challenging. Okay. And then where is your favorite place to read?
Well, we've recently moved, so I don't know exactly what my new favorite place will be, but we have a really great front porch
Okay.
with a swing, and so I imagine it'll be there.
Yes, that sounds delightful.
Yeah.
And then lastly, what are you reading next?
Oh gosh, I should have been ready for this. What I'm reading is still more stuff for my research, which I
Okay.
can't tell people about because
Yep,
I'm keeping the subject really close to my vest.
as you
But
should.
I got a great book as a gift from a friend that's called Here,
Okay.
Here. So the place here.
Yep.
And the subtitle is Women Writing on Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And it's a collection of short stories and poetry and excerpts of just Upper Peninsula stuff. And as a Michigander, we won the Toledo War because we got the Upper Peninsula and Ohio got Toledo, and that's fine.
Yeah.
We don't care
Yeah.
about Toledo. The Upper Peninsula is just a gem, and I love spending time up there. And so I'm looking forward to reading more of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love the hyper local books. So that's
Yeah.
really fun. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Well, I really appreciate the discussion. It was lots of fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Erin Bartels and her book flight of color. We'd love to hear what other books you might pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are reading next, especially if you have heard about it on the show, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.